Today's the day. It's finally here, and I could not be more excited because today we're talking about gelato horror movies.
Giallo.
What?
It's Giallo horror.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about, but in short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And today, the subgenre we're looking at is the Giallo film. And the Giallo film, it is basically Italian horror movies by and large. And the history of the Giallo is pretty interesting, and we really aren't going to be able to give it full justice here in this video, but we're going to give you a kind of a brief overview of it at least. And basically, the term Giallo, which basically means yellow in Italian, comes from a series of pulp novels called Giallo Mondadori. And no, I'm almost certainly not pronouncing that correctly because my Italian is deplorable. But they were a series of pulp novels, crime novels that had yellow covers, hence the name. And they would be kind of lurid and violent and sexual and gritty with crime stuff. And the Giallo film were often based, at least early on these novels or inspired and derived from the concepts of these novels. And that's where the name for the subgenre comes from, and that's what the movies generally are. Like I said, they're generally from Italy, although there's an argument to be made that other movies have made movies in the Giallo style that are, would fall under the same Giallo umbrella. But by and large, we're talking about Italian movies, and we're talking about them being mostly prevalent in the 60s and 70s. And then a little bit into the 80s too, but the movies really start up in the 60s, or at least the movies that or for the Giallo style start up in the 60s and really have their heyday in the 70s, and then into the 80s. And they are really kind of a combination of a thriller slash mystery movie, coupled with like the early progenitor of the slasher film. And with a description like that, you'd think it would be right up Professor Victor's alley, considering how much I love all of that stuff. You'd think that the Giallo would be for me. And it sort of is, but it sort of isn't, and I'll explain. See, the Giallo is very stylized, at least, traditionally speaking. And I'm speaking, broadly, generalizing here when there are exceptions to everything, but for the most part, the movies tend to be really stylish with lurid kills and violence that is very uh, graphic for the time and kind of lingers on the violence. The camera kind of lingers on the violence. Bright, vibrant colors tend to be a thing in there. We'll get into that in a little bit. There tends to be a plot that is maybe it's mysterious, but maybe a little convoluted, and maybe not enough care being placed to the plot. In favor of the stylish look of the movies, cool, interesting locations, interesting lighting, strange camera angles is a big deal here. So it's a very stylized, stylish, unique kind of looking film, the Giallo, or Gialli for plural. And so it's a very specific taste, and you're either with it or you're not. And I am kind of with it. Where it tends to fall for me is that flimsy story aspect to it. A lot of these movies, the plot, the mystery does feel a little secondary to the style. And the style is great. I love the style. I love the lighting. I love the camera work. I love the melodramatic acting. I love the colors, all of it. All the tropes work for me. I just wish that more often than not, the stories hit a little bit better than they do. It is kind of unfortunately, kind of a common trope with these movies, and it's what makes the Giallo film or the Giallo subgenre not be one of my favorites. Even though I like it very much, do not get me wrong. I'm into the Giallo film. I'm into gialli. I like it. I just don't love it as much as the slashers that really owe a huge debt of gratitude towards them. More on that in a minute. I push the slasher button more, even though those movies often the storylines are kind of stupid there too, but they're not It's obvious. It's clear that they're not trying to do that. Whereas the Giallo seems like it's trying to give you a really deep story. You invest in it, only to find out it doesn't usually pay off as well as you'd like it to, and more often than not is a little bit disappointing. All that said, the good grossly outweighs the bad when it comes to the Giallo movies. They are absolutely a lot of fun. They, especially when you think of them as a product of their time, when you think about when they came out and what they're showing, oftentimes it's a little shocking even by today's standards. So it really is a fascinating time capsule, if you will, a look back into a different time when horror was still coming up with new things that were really pushing the envelope a little bit. It's like, yeah, I call it the progenitor of the slasher film, and it 100% is. But it also, predates, things like torture porn, stuff like that, where, you know, filmmakers were clearly pushing the envelope, trying to make the audience uncomfortable, trying to see what they could get away with. And it really is evident here, especially if you delve into the history of it, which I encourage you to do. Like I said, we're not really digging terribly deeply into the history of the Giallo film here. There are other YouTube videos that will do it. There's some great books on the matter. I highly recommend you dig into it if you like these kind of movies because it's fascinating, fascinating stuff. And there's a lot of interesting history and behind the scenes stuff to explore. But we're going to focus on the films themselves. We're going to focus on some of what I think are the best examples of the Giallo subgenre, some of my personal favorites. And in fact, we are going to rank them in order of my personal favorites, how much I like them. Undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate, with the postgraduate one being the one I like the most. And I did that simply because, like I said, I like the Giallo subgenre, even though it's not my favorite, because they're not the most even storyline, things. So I wanted to talk about these movies and how much I like them because I want to talk about why I like them or why they succeed, where some of the other ones fall a little bit flat for me. So we're going to get into it that way. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's talk about these movies. The first movie that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Bird with the Crystal Plumage came out in 1970 and is the feature film debut of Dario Argento, and it is absolutely a fantastic debut. Most filmmakers wish they could do something as cool as this for their very first feature film. Argento really kind of just announcing his presence with this, and it really is a noteworthy debut and a noteworthy movie, especially in the giallo subgenre. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a writer, an American writer, who's in Rome, and while he's there, he witnesses an attempted murder of a woman in a really fascinating scene, actually. And he was able to scare off the attacker and keep her from dying. And then, as he gets questioned and as the police started digging into what happened and who done it, if you will, he starts getting pulled into that too and starts helping the police and starts doing his own investigation to try to solve the murder or the attempted murder and figure out what's going on. And as he gets more and more into it, more and more strange things start happening and revelations are revealed. And of course, I'm going to stop there so as to not spoil it for anybody. But the thing about this movie is that it is a great movie that I enjoy very, very much, but it is also an example of how the plot can be a little bit disappointing. And disappointing is too strong of a word when we're talking about this movie. It's not a disappointing story for this movie, but it is indicative of what my issue with giallo movies in general is, which is that the plot kind of feels heavy and interesting and gets a little convoluted, and then the payoff is questionable, and sometimes it feels like the surprise of the payoff may not make a lot of sense or may not really withstand scrutiny. I think in this case, it probably does. I'll be honest with you, I try not to think about it too much. I try not to put too much thought into it because I really like this movie. I like it and I don't want to poke holes in it too much. So I'm maybe a little biased about it, but if I'm being honest, it might not hold up to scrutiny. The plot might not hold up to scrutiny. And that's okay because what we're talking about here, again, is style over story. And when you're talking style and you're talking Argento, you know what you're talking about. You're talking about interesting camera angles. You're talking about awesome, bright, vivid colors. You're talking about just really interesting visuals that really kind of stick with you and set a certain mood, set you on edge. He really knows how to frame a shot, how to set a scene, how to dress a set, And it's right here again, first movie, and it blows me away because this movie basically is popularizing a lot of the giallo tropes. A lot of the stuff that you're thinking of when you're thinking of giallo, really, this is the movie that kind of solidified it and made it kind of commonplace, made it the tropes that it is for the giallo movie. Is it the one that invented it? No, but more on that in a little bit. But Argento really did a great job of putting all of these aspects or styles and tropes and things together into a package that was palatable for a mainstream audience because it was a big commercial hit, a big critical hit. Everybody liked this movie, and it really put giallos on the map. It really made them kind of more mainstream, made them marketable, made them profitable, and made them prolific because that meant studios could make money off them. They were going to make a lot more of them. Argento solidified himself as a master horror director right out the gate. And this movie is often called the first in his what's so-called Animal trilogy, along with Cat o' Nine Tails and Four Flies on Grey Velvet. I haven't gone into this too much in the channel, but people who know me personally know I'm not a big fan of the trilogy concept, especially when it's not really a trilogy because these movies really have nothing to do with each other other than that they're just kind of have animals in the name. So kind of a silly idea for trilogy, but whatever. Thought I'd bring it up because people do refer to it as the Animal Trilogy, but the movies really don't connect in any way. And this movie stands on its own, and it's a good one. It's a really good foray into the giallo subgenre. If you're not really familiar with it, this is a pretty good place to start. Because, like I said, it's accessible. The story mostly works if you don't think about the ending too hard. It is a good ending. I didn't see it coming at least, and it looks fantastic. It really is going to give you a flavor of what the giallo is going to be like. If you don't dig this, chances are you're not going to like the subgenre as a whole. So this is a really good one to kind of dip your toes into and see if you like it. I love it. I'm a bit of an Argento fan, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, like I said, but I'm trying to give you as unbiased look as I can muster, and I still think it's great. And I still think it's worth your time. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. But I'm guessing many of you have, and you probably have thoughts on it. So if so, share those with us in the comments below because I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. But Birth of Crystal Plumage is an absolute fantastic start to our giallo exploration. The next movie that we're talking about, the graduate level selection, is A Bay of Blood, aka Twitch of the Death Nerve. A Bay of Blood came out in 1971 and is directed by Italian horror legend Mario Bava. And this movie is absolutely, positively fantastic. It barely missed being my favorite Giallo movie because I absolutely love it, even though this movie really does have the wonky, somewhat disappointing storyline plot issues that I complain about. Despite all that, I love this movie. And let me explain to you why as we dig into it. But first, if you haven't seen it before, the movie takes place in a bay where a series of murders are happening that are centered around the land in the bay and a potentially complex land deal and people who are inheriting that land. And there is a lot of people with interest in getting the rights to that land, and that is potentially fueling the murders that are happening. And there's a lot of exploration into who's done it and why, and the answer is not nearly as concise and clear as you would think or hope it would be. But again, I won't spoil it for anybody other than to say that honestly, that's not why you're here. If you're watching Bay of Blood or Twitch the Death Nerve, which by the way is a really great title for a different title, and yeah, the reason why some of these movies have titles is different titles is because they'd get packaged for different markets, U.S. and U.K., etc., and they get retitled different names, and so there's different names for the movies, and sometimes I'll mention them. But the movie is really, if you're here for it, you're here for it for the kills. Because if there is a movie, a giallo movie that really does become the progenitor of the slasher movie, it's this one. It's Bay of Blood. And it's because of that violence. Now, Mario Bava was already a well-known, well-established director when he made this movie. This movie was really a foray into the violence and gore that people were not prepared for. It was very controversial when he did this. People were really turned off to it, as a result, this movie wasn't quite as popular at the time as say something like Bird of the Crystal Plumage because people were thrown off to it because as much violence as there might be in Bird of the Crystal Plumage, there's a lot more here in Bay of Blood. And the violence is graphic and gruesome and very influential. A lot of the way the kills are depicted in this movie would go on to influence slasher movies in the 80s. In particular, Friday the 13th Part 2, because there are two kills in particular in this movie that are downright cribbed for Friday the 13th Part 2. They're virtually shot for shot. In fact, they're actually a little tamer than they are in Bay of Blood. I mean, basically ripping it off. They're just basically ripping it off. And I love me some Friday the 13th, so you know I loved it when I saw this movie. It was a lot of fun for me to see this influence, to see where the ideas for these kills were coming from, to see how they got popularized, how they the impact they had on the horror, the horror genre as a whole, and creating new subgenres outside of giallo. It really is an incredibly influential movie. Some people even refer to this as the first slasher movie. I don't think I'd go that far because I'm still looking at Psycho, but this movie is an important milestone in the slasher genre, a subgenre, even though it really is a giallo movie, and it is doing a lot of the giallo tropes that we're familiar with. A lot of the stuff that we saw in Bird of the Crystal Plumage can also be seen in A Blade of Blood. POV shots from the killer. Again, another thing that gets stolen by the slasher subgenre. A lot of the weird camera angles. It really is nailing a lot of that. What it's not nailing is the script. And the reason I say that is because in an effort to give you a really twisty, turny mystery, which it actually succeeds at doing, it becomes a very convoluted story with a lot going on. And it's all over a land deal, a development deal for the lakeside, bayside property, and that's not the most compelling thing in the world. And of course, you've got a lot of characters that none of them are particularly likable, which again, slasher trope, right? But really kind of hard to latch onto anything or anyone. The story isn't the most compelling or anything, anything like that to grab you. But what it's got is gore, violence, and sex. It's got some nudity in there. It's got some stuff in there. It's got some sex stuff, which is part of this giallo trope. Women in peril, scantily clad or nude. Things like that. Sexuality is a big part of the giallo, and Bay of Blood really is driving into that to its success. Really, like I said, if you're here for this movie, it's for that. It's for the sex and violence. It's for the stylization, the kills, the interesting filmmaking, because Mario Bava is a great filmmaker. It's not for the story, which is not horrible, but just mediocre. But I still love it. I love it because again, all these other things outweigh the negatives of the mediocre script. Everything else is just top notch for me, and I love it. So this movie ranks pretty high for me, and obviously I'm effusive about it. So I'm gonna say go ahead and check it out, of course. But you might have a different opinion if you've seen it. Let me know in the comments if you didn't like it, or if you have an issue with it, or you think the script problems are just too insurmountable. Please let me know. We'll have a discussion. But if you haven't seen it, I would definitely check this one out because I think it's a strong example of a giallo film. And our last selection today, the postgraduate level selection, is Tenebrae. Tenebrae came out in 1982, and it's also known as Unsane. And it is another Dario Argento movie. And even though I kind of wanted to not just do a bunch of Argento movies because he's so prevalent and prominent in this subgenre, I couldn't help it because I love this movie. It's my favorite giallo movie for sure, and it's one of my favorite Argento movies. So I couldn't not put it on the list. So I had to put Argento on here twice. So be it. If you haven't seen the movie before, the movie's about a U.S. writer in Rome yet again on a book tour. And in this time, he gets to Rome and finds out from the police that there have been a series of murders going on that seem to be influenced by his new book. The killer seems to be emulating things that are in his book, and they suspect that there might be some sort of connection between him and the killer, or maybe he's not quite safe. Of course, the writer gets concerned and gets curious, starts looking into things, and hijinks abound, as they tend to do, of course. And I won't spoil anything more than that, but the movie's plot, for me, works a lot better than a lot of giallo movies, including the ones we talked about already, specifically Bird of the Crystal Plumage, because the setup is very similar. American writer in Rome, But after that, they diverge quite a bit, and I feel like Tenebrae has a much more solid script, a much more solid footing for the story to work with that I think works a lot better. I'm much more engaged in. The mystery works a lot better for me. The payoff is much more interesting to me. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now it's funny because it is considered to be one of his best movies now, but when it came out in 1982, not so much. It was kind of panned. People didn't really dig into it that much, and I even think it took a long time to get a U.S. release. But it it really didn't. People didn't get it. I guess people weren't feeling it. I don't know exactly why. I didn't dig too deeply into the reasons for this, but people weren't feeling it, and it wasn't until it kind of got revisited or reconsidered later on in later years that people go, oh, wow, this really is a great movie. And they're right, it is. It's a fantastic movie. And I think part of why it works so well is because of the origins of the story. The story is based on Argento's actual experience with criticism he would get about the violence in his movies and how that violence might be influencing people or encouraging people to act in certain ways. It's stuff that I kind of personally feel is a little bit of nonsense, really. But I like that he decided to take this on as a topic and just uh, make it the subject of one of his films. Really, instead of shying away from it or trying to underplay this criticism, he put it front and center in the movie script, and it works really, really well. It's an interesting concept to make a movie about, and that meta aspect of knowing that it really is rooted in criticism that Argento himself was getting is a really wonderful extra layer of verisimilitude, I guess. I don't know. But it really works for me. And it seems like he's more invested in this story. And as a result, the story is more solid. It works a lot better. It holds water. It never makes me feel like it was disappointing or subpar. It really is solid for me. Not amazing, but solid. And I know I might not be in the majority of that. There may be a lot of people who have problems with the story, especially the way it ends. I don't. It really worked for me. Now, the way it ends does, and I won't spoil it, of course, but does lend itself to some question about what exactly is Argento trying to say about this topic. And I won't go into too more than that because I don't want to spoil it. But there are some interesting themes going on in the movie, themes of trauma and how one deals with trauma, voyeurism, and sexual interests or deviance. And I use that word loosely because that's kind of the word that would be used at the time. And I read a couple of reviews and kind of saw some of that talked about. And the themes are challenging and debatable how successfully he explores those themes. I would be lying if I said I felt like he really nailed the exploration of those themes, but I like the fact that they're in there. I like the fact that he's tackling some stuff that is maybe not the easiest stuff in the world to tackle. I feel like the movie's ambitious, and even if it doesn't completely succeed, I appreciate the ambition. I also appreciate a full-blown Dario Argento style film with the camera work, the colors, the mood, the lighting, the acting. Everything is peak Argento doing what he does, and it's absolutely wonderful. There are some wonderful gory kills in here. They're really very effective, very shocking, and very enjoyable for people like me who like this kind of stuff. And it's part of why it wound up being one of the video nasties. We've talked a little bit about the video nasties in Britain in the 80s, that the whole movement to get movies banned and get people arrested for selling or renting these movies out or owning them. And this is one of the movies that got on that list. And if you watch it now, you'll be like, "Really? This is one of the movies that got on that list?" Yep, it is. But that's more an indictment on the movement, the video nasty movement, than it is on the film. The film itself, like I said, it has its moments. It has some stuff that's pretty shocking. It has some stuff that's maybe a little controversial, but by today's standards, probably not really as shocking as you would think, given the reputation of it. But it is really, really good. Like I said, I am effusive about the movie. I really enjoy it. I'm very happy that it's been reevaluated, and it seems like more and more people now are discovering it or really like endorsing it, really getting on board with it as being one of Argento's best and one of the more important giallo films that you can see. And it really, compared to the first movies we talked about, which have some sort of cultural significance in the giallo movement, if you will, this one really doesn't because it's coming in the 80s. It's coming, after the subgenre has been established for quite a while. But it really is a great example of a giallo doing it right. Like I said, I do these movies in order of how much I like them. This is the one I like the most because I think this is the one that takes all the elements and really ties them together nicely. You know, it's got the mask killer, it's got the style, the angles, all of the music, everything is good in this movie, and it's really kind of working for me in a great way that just sums up the potential of this giallo movie and what it can be. It's like the best of what it can be. And so I feel like if more of the movies actually were like this would be one of my favorite subgenres, bar none. But since it's really more like the pinnacle than the standard example, well, I've gone into it. I like these movies, but they're not always my favorite. But this one stands up with many of my favorite slasher movies and slasher franchises. So obviously, I would say go see it if you haven't seen it before, and I invite you to dispute my effusiveness about it in the comments below if you didn't like it. So that's going to do it for our choices for this yellow subgenre, but I have a few extra credit movies as I always do. And in this case, they are all movies that I think are really, really good because I just wanted to celebrate what I think is the good of Giallo and not really worry about the stuff that I think falls too flat. So let's dig into these. The first one I'm going to mention is Blood and Black Lace. Blood and Black Lace came out in 1964. So right off the bat, you should be like, hey, Professor Victor, that's out of scope. It's pre-1970. And you're right. I'm bending the rules here, but it's just an extra credit movie. So I'm going to bend it because we got to talk about Mario Bava a little bit more. If you haven't seen Blood and Black Lace, it's the story of this fashion house that has a bunch of models in there, and the models are getting murdered, and there's an investigation into what's going on, who's murdering them, and why. And it has to do with this mysterious diary, and there is a bunch of people in the house that have a reason to be worried about this diary, which makes, of course, every one of them a suspect, sets up a really great murder mystery, but also doesn't forget that it's a giallo movie with all the normal giallo tropes. I'm going to stop there so it's not spoil the plot any further, but the movie is really good because once again, you've got Bava doing his stylish thing. But the reason that I brought this one up, even though it's a little out of scope, is because of how important it is. It's not Baba's first Giallo movie, and it's not the first Giallo movie ever. The first Giallo movie ever that people generally consider to be the first Giallo is The Girl Who Knew Too Much, also directed by Bava. But I didn't put that one here because it's black and white, and it's just like kind of got some of the Giallo ideas. It's like the progenitor of the Giallo subgenre. It's not really fully Giallo, at least in my opinion. I don't think you get fully Giallo till his next movie, this one, Blood and Black Lace. This is the one that really is creating a lot of these tropes. The mask killer with the black gloves and the trench coat, some of the colors and camera work and the kills and things like that, the violence against the women. This is the stuff that is going to become the standard for the Giallo movies. It's going to be the tropes that you see in all of them. It's going to be the formula by which everything follows. This movie, more than The Girl Who Knew Too Much, sets all of that up. And I think that that's so important that I had to mention it here, even though it is technically out of scope. It's Bava figuring out, the Giallo subgenre for everybody, including Argento, to follow this lead. Bird of the Crystal Plumage basically is following Blood and Black Lace quite a bit. It's heavily influenced by Blood and Black Lace. It's not even trying to say it's not. So this movie is incredibly important. I didn't put it on the syllabus because of the fact that it's out of scope, but it really is incredibly influential, incredibly important, and actually really, really good. The movie is melodramatic in the best possible ways. It's got a fun mystery that I was really engaged by. Is the ending satisfactory? Yeah, probably, but not the most amazing ending. But I still think the ride was good enough that it's definitely worth mentioning, and it is a great example of Bava doing his thing without the gore that you would see later in Bay of Blood. The movie it's got some gore, it's got its kills, but nowhere near to the level of explicit gore and violence that you'd see in Bay of Blood. So this one may be a little bit more palatable for those of you that don't like gore, and it definitely was received a lot better than Bay of Blood for that reason. But Bava movies are always good to watch in general, but this one in particular is very influential. It really does set the tone and set the rules, if you will, for what would come to follow in Birth of Crystal Plumage, Bay of Blood, everything that follows. So very influential, very noteworthy, and definitely one you should check out. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Torso. Torso came out in 1973 and is directed by Sergio Martino. So finally, we've got a director that's not Argento or Bava. We're talking about somebody different. So finally, we get to that. And this one may be less influential and less important than some of the other movies that we talked about today. But I did want to talk about it because, well, frankly, because I like it a lot and I think that it'd be worth talking about. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a bunch of students at a university in Italy, and suddenly they start getting killed off. There is a killer at large who seems to be killing university students, and the university and the police are trying to determine who it would be and looking for people to give help, and if they've seen anything. And some of the students have seen something having to do with a red and black scarf, and they start to suspect that maybe that the killer is amongst them, and they might even know who it is. And then they decide to go on, get away from things for a little while and go on a little trip to get away from the situation. And of course, hijinks abound as always. And I realize I'm being a little vague on this one because I don't want to spoil it for you. And once again, maybe even being worried about spoiling things isn't such a big deal here because this is an example of a movie where the story, the plot is maybe not super satisfying. And I say that not because I think it's mediocre or not done well. I found the mystery to be rather engaging and good. The issue I had with it was really that the people, some of the plot points, the people, the things they would do, the conclusions they would come to felt a little bit unlikely, a little bit hard to believe, a stretch of my imagination to buy into that plot point. It's really kind of a minor quibble in the movie because overall I'm really enjoying it. It really does have the slasher vibe. And that's the thing. I think the closer the Giallos get to slasher, the more I tend to like them. And this one very much feels like a slasher movie. Like I said, it wasn't super influential because I think that the slasher subgenre is taking more from earlier Giallos, like we were talking about earlier, like Bay of Blood. But Torso really has that feel because it has the very lurid kills, the sexuality. In fact, I would dare say the movie is probably more sleazy. It's kind of got a sleazy feel to it. Think Friday the 13th Part 5. It really has a lot of sex and nudity and violence and gore. And for somebody who likes slasher movies and who loves Friday the 13th Part 5, that works for me. I think this movie's really good. I think it's a lot of fun. And I think that it really kind of scratches that slasher itch that I have. So I'm maybe more partial to this movie than I should be because I think it's got a mixed reputation. I think there's a lot of people who kind of dismiss this as just a standard giallo with a little bit more sleazy sex and stuff in it and violence, but. There are a lot of other people who really like this one and think that it really holds up pretty well. I'm one of those people. I think that if you like slashers and then you're getting into giallo, this is probably one that's going to go down pretty well for you. I don't think it's the deepest of movies. I don't think it's the most interesting one, but I do think that the story holds together enough. Even though, like I said, I feel like there's some plot points that are convenient. Let's put it that way. Convenient plot points, but overall, I think the story winds up being good. I think that the ending winds up being good. I think it works rather well, and I'm satisfied with it. But again, it's the content, it's the kills and stuff like that that works for me. If you like slasher movies, this is one I definitely recommend for you. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts if you've seen it, because like I said, it's not a universally loved movie, but it's one that I really like, so I wanted to talk about it. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to bring up is a movie called Don't Torture a Duckling. Don't Torture a Duckling came out in 1972 and is directed by Lucio Fulci, who we have talked about before, and finally get to talk about him in this video. Another great legendary Italian horror director, probably known more a little bit for his gorier zombie type movies, but this is him doing the giallo and doing it extremely well because he's a great director and he knows what he's doing. And this movie is a great example of that. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is set in a small Italian village and focuses on murders of young boys, young children getting killed, and nobody knows who's doing it. Of course, the village is in a bit of a panic about this, and the police and a reporter come in to investigate the murders, try to figure out what's going on and solve it. There are, of course, several interesting suspects and other people who are trying to help in the investigation. But the mystery is, while it unravels, more kids get killed, more bad things happen, hijinks abound, and it comes up with a rather shocking twist ending. I don't know if it's a twist, but it's surprising at least. But we won't go into it too much because I don't want to spoil it for you guys. But Don't Torture a Duckling is fascinating for a number of reasons. First and foremost, like I mentioned, Lucio Fulci, who is a wonderful director and is making a really good movie here. And this movie maybe has a little bit less of the typical giallo tropes because it doesn't have that same stylized sexuality that like the movies that we talked about previously have. It doesn't have that Argento look. It doesn't have the Bava look. It has a Fulci look, and it definitely feels a little bit different. But that's a good thing. It works really, really well. It also has some really great gore in it. Not a ton, but it doesn't shy away from showing some gross stuff that kind of just smacks of Fulci. But it also doesn't shy away from killing children. You know, it's about a child murder, and children get killed in this, which is a pretty shocking, edgy thing to do in a movie. Not only in 1972, but even today, people might be uncomfortable with this. If that makes you uncomfortable, this is probably not going to be the movie for you because it really is delving into the idea of somebody who, attacks children and kidnaps them and kills them, not molesting them though. So I'll just put that out there on the table. Although there is some questionable sexuality type stuff going on in this movie with the kids that is maybe a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to spoil that either, but there's some challenging stuff in here. There's also some interesting messages going on here, about things like sexuality and children growing up and things like that and what they're exposed to, and also some commentary on the church. There's a priest character in there, and so there's some commentary about faith, Catholicism in specific, but the church in general that is interesting stuff that maybe doesn't get fully fleshed out, maybe doesn't, kind of like when we were talking about earlier with some of the themes that Argento was exploring. The themes get kind of brushed up against, get explored a little bit, but they don't go too deep into it. So it doesn't really feel like a message movie, but it also maybe doesn't accomplish what it could have accomplished with there. But that is a nitpick because the movie is really good. The mystery holds up really well. I liked the ending quite a bit. Maybe that's controversial. I'm not sure. I didn't see a lot of debate about the ending, but I think the ending is absolutely great. I really like this movie a lot. I think it is kind of an unusual giallo, but it does fit most of the tropes pretty well, at least enough so that it doesn't seem odd that it's often considered under the giallo umbrella, even though it doesn't have the same look or feel as a lot of the other ones we've talked about. It's definitely worth your time. Definitely worth checking out. It's a good mystery. It's got some gruesome stuff in it. It's really edgy and got some dark, dark subject matter that I think holds up really well, works really well. Very successful movie. Really enjoy it. If you haven't seen it, it may or may not be for you. So think about it. Maybe look up what's in it to decide if that's going to be an issue for you. But if you have the constitution for it, definitely check it out because it is a great movie. And Fulci, I mean, you can't really go wrong with him. So, what are you going to do? So that's going to do it for our look into the Giallo horror movie. Like I said, if you like these kinds of movies, I implore you to go and look into the whole genre as a whole, not just the movies itself, but the stories behind it, the filmmaking, the history of it, because it's very rich, very interesting, very intriguing. There's a lot of stuff to talk about that we just didn't even touch on in this video. So if you like this stuff, there's a whole world out there for you to explore. But now we're going to explore a horror trivia pursuit question. As you know, I'm going to read this live on camera without cuts to make sure you know that I didn't cheat. And we're going to look at the killer category on the card because we're talking about movies with killers. So let's take a look. Okay, here's the question. In 2011's The Innkeepers, how many rooms on the second floor of the hotel are still in use? Ooh, that is a good question. That is a really good question. And as many of you probably know, I love me some Ty West, especially with X and Pearl having just come out. Man, he really crushed it with both of those movies. But The Innkeepers, one of his earlier films, is absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite ghost story movies. We did talk about it on the channel earlier, and I absolutely love it. I love the filmmaking in that. I love the actors in that. I love everything about that movie, frankly. And here's the thing, though. I don't know the answer with any sort of confidence. I really, really don't. I I have a thought process. I'm looking at the card and I think how many rooms on the second floor? And that's kind of where I'm getting a little bit confused on that is they make a point about the second floor on the question. And I'm wondering if that kind of is somehow tricking things or changing the answer. and I'm worried that I'll talk myself out of things because, as you know, I tend to talk myself out of questions or answers to questions in these things, and I'm not going to do that today. I do love the movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And of course, I'm prattling on a little bit to give you a chance to think about it. If you're trying to think of an answer, but if you haven't seen the movie, you're just me taking a guess. Anyways, you're going to be guessing a number. I would say if you like like ghost movies, check this one out. If you have seen it, lock in your answer because I'm probably going to go ahead and take my guess now. My guess is one. And the reason I'm guessing one is because right at this moment, I can only remember one room being rented out by Kelly McGillis specifically. And it was on the second floor, at least it was not on the first floor. And that's where I'm kind of getting iffy about that is maybe there was no rooms rented on the second floor. Maybe she's on the third floor. I'm not quite sure. So I'm a little iffy on that, but I'm sticking with the answer of one. And if I'm forgetting of somebody else being in the hotel right now, maybe I feel like I feel like I'm forgetting somebody else. God, it's been a little while since I've seen that movie, obviously. So let me stop prattling on. My answer is one. What does the question say? What does the card say? 4 rooms. 4 rooms. Okay, I don't remember that at all. I don't remember that at all. 4 rooms blows me away because I thought the answer was either one or two, and I was vacillating between one and two, and I almost said two, and I stuck with one because I thought Kelly McGillis, and I cannot fathom 4 rooms unless we're talking about the two innkeepers using rooms too. And I guess maybe that's part of it. I was thinking about rooms for rent, and they weren't renting rooms; they were just staying in there while the hotel was closing down. So were they included in that? I guess they were. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this movie, guys, because I should have gotten that right, and I was way, way off, way wrong. I've gotten a couple of easy questions, and this one really shouldn't have been that hard, but I blew it. Did you guys get it right, or did you guess something else too? I'd like to know what you guys thought about this movie, and what you guys said as an answer. I got it horribly, embarrassingly wrong. So clearly, I am a fake Ty West fan. I need to go rewatch all of his movies immediately. But I'll be doing that and wrapping up this video, and we'll come back next week to see something else and hopefully get a question that I don't get wrong and embarrass myself. But until then, class dismissed.